Hello, Vigilantes. Welcome to another bonus episode of Vigilante Vibes, a Marvel podcast where we discuss all things Marvel, MCU, and nerd culture. I'm your host, Max Taff, joined by my co-host, the guacamole to my salsa, Megan Nicole.
Hello, mutants and mutant kind. Like Max said, we're here to give you all the Marvel talk, but in a non toxic way. It's the fun of the fandom without the gross toxicity that's running rampant in all the fandoms.
That's right. And today we have a very exciting episode. The incredible comic creator Erica Schultz joins us and has agreed to get interrogated by us about all of her career highlights and the amazing things that she has done in this space. So we are so happy to have you with us. Welcome, Erica. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming.
Of course.
Oh, this is so exciting.
I know, I'm really excited. So we've got some good questions for you today. So let's get started here. I'm really curious. So, doing some research on you for this interview, you started your career as an art director at an advertising agency and later transitioned to working on comics. Can you share what motivated you to make that shift and how your background in advertising has influenced your work in comics?
Well, it wasn't exactly a planned shift. I had gotten laid off in 2007, like half the
Mm,
world. And so I was still freelancing as an art director for, smaller ad agencies. I'd been working at like a big, like worldwide agency in New York City. And so I was freelancing at these like small agencies. But they're really like, there just wasn't enough work. So I
mm,
had reached out to just a couple of people that I knew, just being like, hey, do you have any leads kind of thing. And one of the people that I reached out to was Marilyn Adams, who happened to be the wife of Neil Adams, the artist. And Marilyn and I
mm,
had known each other for many years. And she had said that, there's a project coming into the studio that is going to be, um, it's going to be like animation kind of. And the project ended up being the Astonishing X-Men motion comic, Gifted.
wow.
So she said, we're looking for people to do digital art and, coloring and things like that, and a lot of like support roles. Just because they had so much stuff, they needed just like bodies, basically.
Mhm.
So I was like, yeah, sure, great. And I was supposed to stay. I was like, it was supposed to be from like December to like April, I think, was as long as the project was going to be going on. And I just stayed there for like 8 years. What was supposed to be like 4 months, I just didn't leave for like 8 years.
Oh,
But yeah.
wow.
And while we were at the studio, I mean, we did the Astonishing X-Men motion comic, and then Neil was doing, a couple mini comic miniseries and stuff like that. So while I was there, again, it was like support roles. So I would do inking, whether it was digital inking or traditional inking on board. I was helping out with doing like color assists and things like that. Corey Adams, who was like the lead colorist at the studio, God rest her. She passed away a few years ago, but Corey was
Mm,
just like a phenomenal colorist. And so I would try and, shadow her, see what she was doing, but also, like assist in, nowadays comics are like everything's so digital, like, even if you're working traditionally, you still have to like scan stuff in to like send it along. So like I was doing pretty much like any little support role in that, and by doing that I learned every single step of the way, and I that was like a huge education, for lack of a better term.
wow.
Yeah,
Mhm,
it really helped for when I started doing self-publishing of my indie work,
mm.
having that experience of knowing like the pipeline. That significantly helped when I was doing my self-publishing, and I still sometimes do that. Yeah.
That's amazing. I feel like you pick up so many different things, doing so many different roles and shadowing so many different artists, like doing their thing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Very
Oh,
cool.
that is amazing. Wow. Congratulations on really making your way all up the way here. That's fantastic. So, you've written for major publishers like Marvel and Dynamite, contributing to titles such as Daredevil, X-23, Xena, Warrior Princess. How do you approach writing for established characters versus creating your own original content?
I think writing for established characters has, I think they both have their own unique challenges. When you're
Hmm.
writing for an established character, you already have a perimeter to stay within, because the character, for the most part, the character has already been, their personality, their do's and don'ts and such, have already been sort of established, in the sense that you just sort of have to tell an original story that will be relevant to the character and their history, but also that'll be new and fresh, and maybe shed a little bit extra light on who they are, but you're not changing who they are. Whereas when
Hmm.
you're doing your own creator own stuff, again, that has its own challenges, because you're creating the world, you're creating the plots, you're also creating the characters and who they are. Um, so they each sort of, it's tough when you're playing in the IP, because you have to play with characters that you can't go too far, because that's out of character for them, but you can't do something that's too, something that's been done a million times before. So that is a
Hmm.
challenge for that. But then, when I used to teach writing, I used to always say that, like, every story is sort of like a three-legged stool. You have to have your world built in, you have to have your character and who they are built in, but then you also have, like, the plot, and you have to sort of build these three tenets, for lack of a better term, to to the same level, because otherwise, things are going to be a little wonky. And I think we've seen that in stories all the time, where you have, like, a story is, like, really, character focused, and, like, really, and the world is so immersive, but, like, nothing really happens, or everything
Hmm.
happens, but you don't really get to know who these people are. And it's sort of like they're almost being sort of like dragged away by this plot, like, in like a rushing river, as opposed to, like, learning who these people are and why they're acting and reacting the way they are, because you don't really know who they are. So yeah, I mean, it's its own separate challenge. um, but I think that, like, I mean, I obviously like doing both. I kind of,
Hmm.
I kind of like playing in the realm of, characters who have already been established, because I like the challenge of doing something new. But even with Xena, I mean, I was able to create some characters that were support characters, and work them in there. I mean, obviously Xena and Gabby were, the headliners, but we were able to create some little support characters that we could put in, and stuff like that. And fun fact, the cover artist for the Xena run that I did was Sergio Davia, who I ended up working with on Daredevil Gang War earlier this
Oh
year.
wow.
Oh.
Very
Oh
cool.
wow.
I like that there's like you can work with the same people on these completely different projects. That's so
Yeah.
nice, and it's that nice to get that familiarity too.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, you touched on a lot of really great topics, especially with narrative, and I can understand like you said, it's kind of like they each have their own separate challenges. Because on one hand, like yeah, it's established, IP, the character has their traits established, and their side characters and their personality, but it's hard sometimes when you're trying to write for that and trying to keep it true to the character and what's already been established, versus when you're having your own character, and yes, you do get that freedom, but then you have so much more groundwork to establish and so much more context to give. So wow, that's I never really thought about it.
It's a lot of extra responsibility when you're working on your own characters. Although I will say, I found a pretty interesting medium when we were working on Hallows Eve. Mike Dowling and Brian Reber, and Joe Caramagna worked on that with me, because Hallows Eve had been established in excuse me, in Amazing Spider-Man, but they didn't
Hmm.
really push the character very much. So, and even before the Amazing Spider-Man Dark Web, Janine Godby had been created by John Romita Jr. and JMD Mateus back in the '90s, but she didn't really have, she wasn't given, like, really a personality. Like, her personality was like Ben's girlfriend.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it was weird, because I was like, okay, so I'm playing in the Marvel sandbox, but I have really a lot of, I have a lot of leeway on this character. Um, And so I went as far as they'd let me. I mean, sometimes they would sort of rein me back, but I tried to push it as far as I could, because it's very rare to have that opportunity to be, to have an established, in air quotes, established character, and still be able
Mm.
to really have a lot of room to expand upon them.
Yeah, it's like a nice
Oh,
sweet spot
wow.
for sure because they're there, but then you can kind of create like their actual story and everything. So that's very cool.
Yeah, I'm just saying I would not be upset at all to see a Hallows Eve blood hunt comic. So like if you want to hook that up for me, that'd be
She's
great.
she's in Blood. Hallows Eve is in Blood Hunt.
Say, is she?
Yeah, so
I'm trying.
in it's already it's I can talk about it because it's already been solicited, but so the
Mm.
Okay.
Blood Hunters anthology that is going on right now, issue number
Yeah.
2 should be out on June 19th, I believe. So in that
Ooh.
Okay.
anthology series, there's 3 different stories, and one story is going to be continuing. So I'm going to have myself, Bernard Chang, and Manuel Maiolo, excuse me, are working on a story where we're building this team, and the team
Mhm.
is Dagger, um, Elsa Bloodstone, White Widow, and
Ooh.
Hallows Eve. And then after that,
Oh.
they've already solicited that we're going to have a 5 issue mini that I don't know who our colorist is going to be just yet, but Mike Dowling is going. Not Mike Dowling. I'm sorry. Robert Gill is going to be doing the art for that. Mike Dowling is working on Daredevil, Woman Without Fear. I have a lot of
Oh, that
pies in the oven right now.
Sounds
that's
like
gonna
it,
be a
yeah.
that's gonna be a banger because the blood hunters I've read so far are just ah, Cloak and Elsa Bloodstone together. You don't think it's gonna fit, but it's just so perfect, and I was obsessed.
I love Elsa. I love her. She's one of my
She's
she's
awesome.
favorites.
she's very snarky. Like she's
I love
even
it.
snarkier than Hallows Eve in this.
Same.
I pushed the
Oh,
snark as far as I could take it with her. Yeah.
Ah, I love that.
not all heroes wear capes, Erica. That's amazing.
I love it. Yes.
You have taught lettering at comics experience and writing and storytelling at the Kubert School. How important is it for you to mentor the next generation of book creators? And what is the most rewarding part of teaching?
Um, I
Hmm.
think it's very important because I think that there's a lot of misconceptions around comics. Like everybody thinks that it's easy to make a comic,
Mhm.
and I think that, and it's funny because NPR actually did an article where they basically wanted to do like a Kickstarter or a crowdfunder for a comic and get it done. And the article that they wrote was kind of a post mortem, being like, "Wow, we really had no clue what we were getting ourselves into," and I give them a lot of credit for acknowledging that, because there's so
Mhm.
many people that think, "Oh, it's just so easy to make a comic," and even if you're making a stapled zine, there is a lot that goes into it. Um, so it's important for me to give information to people who are trying to make a comic, whether it was through teaching the Kubert School, or teaching with Comics Experience. And also because, like, when you're making a comic, whether it's, an 8 page stapled zine, or, some big, hardcover tome that you're putting out, like an OGN, you want to put your best foot forward. You want it to look as professional as possible. That means either hiring professionals or learning how to letter professionally, how to put a book together. Because, like we were saying before, like, even if you're working traditionally, everything
Mhm.
still, your files all have to be digital. So the days of mailing pages to your inker or mailing pages to the publisher is gone. Any printer that you use is going to have the pages digitally, so you got to have to know how to scan, how to size at the proper size, how to letter, how to make sure that the book is formatted properly. I mean, and I mean, it's not like the fun sexy stuff, but it's so important, these fundamentals of and I think it's, when people come up to me at a convention and say, hey, this is my comic and I took your writing course, or I took your lettering course, or I took your Kickstarter course. When I used to teach a Kickstarter class, a crowdfunding class for the Cubert School as well. When people come up and say, hey, I took this course and this is my comic, and you look and it's like, wow, this looks good, this looks professional, and like I said, even if it's 4 pages, an 8-page zine stapled together, it still has, like, it looks like you put effort into it and it looks professional. Because
Hmm.
nothing is going to draw, and this is such a nitpicky thing for me personally, but nothing draws me out of a book more than when something is formatted improperly, or the lettering is like
Mm.
totally off or something. And I think that, you know it's fundamentally important to know these things, because another thing is that people kind of think that comics, oh, it's just a bunch of people having fun. Yeah, it is a lot of fun, but it is also a lot of work. And there are like
Yeah.
standards for comics, like standard sizes. And if you're going to print your book, you got to know that if you go with a standard size, it's going to be less expensive for a printer, unless they're trying to,
Hmm.
So you should know these things, because if you have some weird wackadoo size that you want to do, then
Hmm.
just know that your quote from the printer is going to be like a lot more expensive than if you do something that's like a standard size. So knowing
Hmm.
this stuff up front is like so important.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, I think feel like you learn so much as you go, and you're right. I mean, I feel like it's one of those things that people would automatically just assume is so easy because it's like, oh, it's just some drawings and some word bubbles, and they just kind of throw it into a book. But it's like there is so much more. There's so many people like that have a job behind every little detail in a comic book. That it's like I feel like a lot of people who maybe just casually read or casually are aware of comic books would just assume that it's such an easy thing just to like slap together and print and that's it.
I mean, when you open a book and you look at that, usually it's the inner front cover, and you look at it, I mean, yes, there's obviously the names, you have your writer, your artist, your colorist, if there's an inker involved, your letter and such, but there's a lot of names still on that
Yeah.
page, and all of those people, the production artist, whoever's putting together, who designed the logo, who put
Hmm.
together, even when it comes to books like comics, like Marvel Comics, you have people who have to drop in the ads. You have art directors who have to create the ads, which then have to get dropped in. I mean, like, there are so many steps that if you think that you can skip a step, you can't.
Yeah.
Like, everybody thinks that they can sort of like take the stairs two by two, and it's like, ah, you can, but it's
Hmm.
not gonna look as good, and it's not gonna look as professional. And I think that's, if this is something that you want to do as a career, that should be your goal, is to produce the most professional looking book that you can.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think you made a good point when you talked about how as someone who works a lot behind the scenes and in production and in crafting the comic books, and when you're reading a book and you see like something incorrectly formatted, it takes you right out of like the immersiveness. And especially in your position because of course you're like hyper focused on the
Yes.
details. So it's just crazy. But yeah, you're absolutely right because I've noticed it too. Whenever you notice those little things, even as a casual reader, like someone who's not into the production and into that whole process, you do notice it, and it does kind of like make you think like, oh wait, that's weird.
Yeah.
It makes you think a second.
It makes you forget that you're part of the story, and makes you realize,
Hmm.
oh, I'm a person reading this story, as opposed to someone who is going on this journey with these characters in this world. Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. So, kind of speaking on, how the many hats that you've worn behind the scenes, in addition to writing, you've also worked as a letterer and an editor on various projects. So, how do these different roles enhance your perspective as a writer, and what do you enjoy most about each aspect of comic book creation?
Um, I think that the more that you do, I call it the cosmic comic wheel. And it's like, if you picture one of those like big old wagon wheels with the big spokes, the
Hmm.
more that you've done of, writing, penciling, inking, lettering, editing, production, everything, the stronger your cosmic comic wheel is. So the fact that I've done everything with the exception of, I mean, I've done background inking and penciling and things like that. I haven't done foreground characters because I'm an okay artist. I'm serviceable. I'm not good. Um, but um, but yeah, I mean, with the exception of that, I mean, like I've done the backgrounds, I've done inking, I've done coloring and everything. I think that knowing all of those other bits makes me a much better writer for multiple reasons, mostly because when an editor says to me, I need to get this script to the artist by this date, so the book can be in production by this date, I know whether or not they're telling lies. Like I know whether or not they're fibbing because I'm like, that's not humanly possible, because I've done it. I've been, and the other thing is that as an editor, there are a couple of different types of editors that there are. Like there are editors that are basically like people who will coordinate the schedule and make sure that like every bit along the way is getting checked off the list. And then there
Mhm.
are other editors that are story editors that are going to work through the motivations of the characters and the plot and how it's going to move from one issue to the next. And then there are other editors that are more like proofreaders where they'll tell you that your commas are in the wrong place. So I mean, so even just the term editor is kind of broad considering how many. It's like when you watch a TV show and you see like 4,000 producers, it's like not every
Mhm.
producer is the same. It's kind of like that. But I think that ultimately it does enhance my experience as a writer because I know what the artist is doing. I know what the letterer is doing. When I'm writing dialogue and I look at the art, after I write the script and it goes to the artist, and then the artist draws it, it comes back, and then I have to do what's called a lettering pass, where I look at the
Mhm.
original script and I look at the art, and I will tweak the dialogue to better match the art. Um,
Mhm.
and so sometimes I'll look at the art, and having been a letterer, I can sort of gauge how much space is, how much dialogue is going to be able to fit. So I might say, oh, you know what, I have this
Mm.
long diatribe in one panel, but I've got room to be able, it's not going to fit in just one panel, I've got room to be able to split it and take it to that next panel as well. Or let me cut a bunch of this stuff out because it's not going to fit. Or on the other side, this line is pretty vague and I've got a big open space. Let me add a little extra dialogue in here to sort of inform the reader of the situation that this character is in. And I can kind of
Mm.
eyeball it from having been a letterer, which I think is really I think it's really beneficial, especially because a lot of times as an editor, I'll see scripts with just tons of dialogue, and it's like, no, this isn't gonna. You're gonna have
Yeah.
two panels on a page and no background because you're just gonna have tons and tons of balloons. Um,
Mm.
so I think that that's really very beneficial for me, having done all of this. And the other thing is that I mean, on a book like Christabel, which is an independent book that I put out last year with artist Amagoya Aguirre. Um, with Christabel, Amagoya did the line art and the coloring, but because of scheduling and such, I was able to help out with coloring. So,
Mm.
I would get the line art, and then I would put in color flats, and then that would go back to Amagoya, who would then do the finishes, put textures, highlights, and just really ramp it up and make it look gorgeous. um and basically, like, having that experience in the past was able I was able to then apply it to an independent project and help the artist
Mhm.
along as well.
That's so cool. I really love that. I mean, it gives you a lot of perspective having done all these different steps, and it help. They really, it really does help. Like I guess when you're able to kind of pre-plan, like you said, when you're able to kind of map things out, and you know how something's going to look, and it keeps that in the back of your head so that you're better able to like execute it, right? If that makes sense.
No,
Very
and I
cool.
think and I think that I mean, some of the best compliments I've ever gotten from artists is that you write like an artist, or when you write a
Mm.
page, you can sort of, you know what's going to fit and what's not going to fit. And
Hmm.
sometimes I'll say, because you have what you tell the editor, and then you have like your little WhatsApp chat in the side. We all do. Um,
Yeah, of
but
course.
like, I'll have the script and I'll send it, and then I'll send like a little note to the artist in WhatsApp and be like, hey, just so you know, I know that there's a lot of dialogue on this one page, but editorial really wants us to sort of hammer home the motivation of this character, or who this character is, or whatever, or we're introducing a new character, so there's going to be some more exposition, and like to really just hammer home who this is, kind of thing, and introduce this character to the wider audience. So just so you know, don't go crazy on doing backgrounds, because it's going to be, basically, there's going to be a lot of balloons. So
Hmm.
I mean, and I sort of, and I say, look, I'm not writing all of this to be like, oh, look at me, look at all this dialogue I can write. But it's basically like, we've got to introduce this character to the audience, and we
Yeah.
got to kind of like go into it a little more than usual, simply because it's an introduction, or this is a new character for, if it's like, especially if it's like a crossover or something like that, because you
Hmm.
have multiple books, and if somebody's only reading one particular book, they might not know what's going on in these other books. So you kind of every
Hmm.
once in a while have to sort of add a little extra dialogue to sort of link
Mm.
up all the books together and stuff like that. So I'll just give them that little information, like, yeah, we gotta link this book and that book, but don't worry, it at least saves you time on having to draw a bunch of backgrounds.
Yeah, that's cool. I never, yeah, because I never really thought about how when you're writing a continuous story like that, especially when it, references different books in the narrative that you're putting together, like you do kind of have to like link and make sure those little mentions are all kind of like weaved throughout there. Yeah, very
Yeah.
cool.
I mean, sometimes sometimes you don't really have that sort of edict, but especially in
Hmm.
crossovers, and especially like multiple line crossovers, like, Blood Hunters you'd mentioned before, something like that, you kind of have to, you know, at least make mention of another character and be like, oh, well, so and so's, up off doing whatever. Like in Gang War, we had, because there were all these different heroes basically protecting a separate section of New York City. It was this
Hmm.
idea of like, well, okay, well, Spider-Man is in Midtown, and Daredevil's in Hell's Kitchen, and Miles, Spider-Man, is in Brooklyn, and Luke Cage is up here, and so we had to figure out, okay, who's going to be coordinating all of this. And that's why, as you're reading the Daredevil book, like every once in a while, like She-Hulk will show up for a page,
Hmm.
um or like Spider-Man, either Spider-Man, whether it's Miles or Peter, or even like Luke Cage will just show up for a page, because you need to have your main character sort of check in, everybody touches their ear, you know
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
check in on the comms, kind of thing. You need to have that, just to say like, okay, yes, this is its own separate story, but it is tied
Hmm.
into all these other things that are going
Yeah, I feel like that's always the hardest thing about New York specifically, especially in Marvel when you're using New York as a setting, there's like 20 different people around that could like easily like jump into to kind of explain like why they're not or why they are or like where, where everybody is. It's true. Everyone's gonna touch their ear and like kind of coordinate who's saving the day today.
Well, I mean, I always joke that like I try and do stories that are over a very short period of time, because there's like only so much
Hmm.
damage you could really do in like 3 days.
Yeah.
So like you're not gonna destroy the world kind of in 3 days. So like the Hallows Eve miniseries was over 3 days, and then at
Hmm.
the epilogue we talk about like 2 weeks later. But that like main core 4.5 issues pretty much were over 3 days, because I'm like, I can't do too much damage in 3 days. You know,
Yeah.
it's enough for there to be a problem, for there to be the pursuit of a solution, and then for the actual solution. So yeah.
Hmm. Very
Oh,
cool. God, I love it.
yeah. So you're the first woman to write a Spawn comic with the
Yes.
upcoming series Rat City. How does it feel to make history with such an iconic franchise? And what can fans expect from your take on Spawn?
I've said this a million times. I never set out to be a good woman writer or a good female writer. I just set out to be a good writer. So the
Hmm.
fact that I am the first woman to ever write Spawn is great. Um,
Hmm.
but that doesn't kind of matter to me. Like I just want to write a really, kick-ass story that people are going to enjoy and characters that people are really going to gravitate towards and that are going to care about, because that's, I think, to me that's the most important thing, is that someone cares about the book that you're writing. Like
Hmm.
the worst like review I could ever get was it was meh. Like that's like the worst review. I mean,
Yeah.
I would take, I hate this book, I'm going to burn it to the ground over meh. Because at least you've elicited some type of reaction. And that's, I mean, that's
Hmm.
truthfully, that's like the purpose of art in general. Just, creating an art is to elicit a reaction. And if it's
Yeah.
just, that's not really a reaction.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that that when people read the book that they really get invested in Peter, Karen, our Spawn. And there's a lot of parallels between Peter and Al. They were both veterans. They both had sort of a they've seen some stuff in wars and
Hmm.
such. But Peter is an amputee, and he is a veteran that kind of got cast aside. And I think that, and I'm making a statement about that, especially because my father and my grandfathers were veterans,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
there is a certain amount of, I think, disdain that people have sometimes when it comes to veterans. And I used to
Yeah.
live and work in New York City, and a lot of people that you would see, unfortunately, unhoused people would be veterans.
Hmm.
So that's something that I really wanted to make a point about. Of, we need to treat our veterans better. We need to treat people in general better. And you
Hmm.
see this, Peter has a lot of guilt over what he, as a soldier, things that he did. And he's working through that, along with Peter, um, one of his squad mates basically is with him. And he ends up losing him. And there's like, there's the grief, there's the sort of mourning a friend, but also trying to survive. There's a lot of these like little bits that are coming in. And Jay Carlos, who is the artist, is just out of this world. I mean, somebody had made a comment saying, well, it's 2111 and people are still using cars. And I'm like, yeah, well, I was born in 1977, and I remember being a kid thinking at the turn of the century everybody was going to have hoverboards and flying
Yeah.
cars.
Hmm.
And it's now 2024, and we don't have hoverboards or flying cars still. So, you know, also, and it was a really great point that that podcaster even made, that I didn't even think about. And they said, well, when you have a world that is very, focused on conflict and war, all the money into innovation is going to go to the military. They're not worrying
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
regular person and giving them their flying car or their hoverboard or whatever.
Hmm.
And I was like, I mean, that's something that I honestly I didn't think about at the time, like consciously think about. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense too.
It does.
So yeah, I mean, it is a process. Um, we we're supposed to be doing 30 issues, and my brain is kind of melted from
Wow.
that. But Todd and Yvette and Thomas and everybody at Todd McFarlane Productions have been so incredibly supportive of this story and supportive of Jay and I, and Jay David Ramos is our colorist.
Hmm.
So it's really, I mean, this is just getting started. Issue number 3 comes out on the 19th of June, I believe, and issue number 4 comes out just before San Diego Comic-Con.
Oh, perfect.
Ooh, exciting. That's
Yeah.
awesome. You really do have a lot of pies in the oven.
Yeah.
Say
Oh my
again. Yeah, I
goodness.
do have a lot of
Is
pies
it?
there. Yeah, I'm finishing up the script for issue number 9. It's on my schedule to finish this week, so issue number 9 is going to be scheduled to finish this week, and then I might take a week off and do more Marvel work, and then go back to 10, which I've already started
Mm,
outlining and stuff.
My gosh, rest
Very
some.
cool.
You're making me
I
tired.
know. When do you sleep?
Honestly, like not very well. I mean, if you follow me on Instagram, you've seen that like I have like some construction stuff going on in my house.
Oh
Okay.
So
gosh.
yeah, like we had a flood, and it's insane. This is a non-toxic podcast, so I will not talk about the mold.
Oh God. Oh, I feel you. Trust me, I've been there, so I know exactly what you're talking about. It's
It's
not fun.
crazy. So I'm just like I am trying so hard just to like focus on the work, and
Hmm.
there are date and I was very transparent with all my editors, whether they were Marvel editors or other projects, or editors at Todd McFarlane Productions, where I said, like, look, these are the photos of this is the state of my physical home right now. Things are a little crazy. I'm trying to stay on track, but just know, like, we have contractors coming in and plumbers coming in, and this and the
Hmm.
next thing, that, like, you know sometimes I might not be able to do a script by a specific deadline. Like, you might get it, like, if your email goes off at midnight, it's because that's when the electricity was turned back on for me to be able to
Oh my God.
send it, kind of thing. But like, I just wanted to make sure, like, I wanted to be transparent and open about it, and like,
Mm.
I'm not like playing games. This is what my kitchen looks like. So, kind of thing. But no, everybody's been fantastic, and
Oh good.
I'm very lucky that my process, I tend to outline pretty. I have pretty tight outlines, so when it comes to scripting, like, the outline is
Hmm.
pretty much for me where most of the hard work goes into, and most of, like, the real heavy lifting goes into the outline. And then when it goes to the script, it's just a matter of, okay, this is what's going to happen on this page. How many panels am I going to drop into that?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Wow. Well, I mean, I think, yeah, I think honestly the best policy is always to be just transparent and be like, listen, this is what's going on in my house, this is what's
Yeah.
going on in my
I was
real
like, go
life.
to
Like, you gotta
Instagram. You
work with
can
me
see
here.
the photos. You can see the photos where I have a giant hole in my kitchen wall. Yeah,
Oh
exactly.
my God,
It's
that's a
yeah,
mess.
it's insane.
Oh,
It's insane, but it
similar
is.
stuff going on here.
Well, it's funny because, like, when my husband and I bought the house, my foster dad and my foster family came over, and he gave us this giant hardcover, like, phone book sized book, and it was like the house book, and it was like a
Oh
list
God.
of all the possible things that could go wrong with your house, and possibly
Oh
what.
no.
And he was like, trust me, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong.
It's true.
But
Hmm.
here, and my husband just takes this, like, giant, 40-pound book, and he's like, all right, thanks. But it's funny because over the past few years, he'd be like, where'd John's book go? You gotta go
Oh
find
my
that book
God.
from John. I'm like, it's
Came in handy.
400 pounds. You can't miss it.
Oh, I need
Oh
that
my
So,
book.
God.
yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Crazy.
I need a. I mean, it's not
Crazy.
awesome things break, but that's such a good idea for a book.
All right. Well, that is, the end of our interview. So we like to always give our guests, a chance to promote any upcoming projects you would like to discuss with our
There's a lot
listeners, and
coming
or
up.
anything that's
So
upcoming for you that you want
we've
to talk
got Blood
about.
Hunters. We'll be finishing up in July. We're gonna have issues 3 and 4 of Blood Hunters, and then in August we're gonna start the new Blood Hunters miniseries, which is gonna be great. We've got Daredevil Woman Without Fear that drops in July. We've got Venomous Black Widow that drops in July. I think Darth Maul one shot that I did might drop in
Ooh.
July or August, maybe. There's like 5 books coming out in July. I cannot keep track. And we've got Rat City is going to be an ongoing for at least 30 issues. So for the next couple of years, Rat City is going to be an ongoing.
Mm.
And there is a project that will be announced at San Diego Comic Con that I'm very, very,
Ooh.
very excited about. I will be at San Diego doing some panels.
Ooh.
I'll also be doing some signings at the Image Comics booth for both Spawn and for my Image Comics series, The Deadliest Bouquet.
Mm.
And yeah, that's it. San Diego and New York Comic Con are basically the two shows that I'm gonna
Oh,
be doing this
perfect.
year. So
So exciting. A lot of crazy stuff coming up, and that's amazing. Congratulations. I'm glad that you're so busy. That's awesome.
Yes, I am glad that I'm busy too. My sleep schedule not so happy, but we'll figure it out. We'll figure
It
it out.
is.
Exactly. And then just if our listeners want to follow you on social media, where can they find you?
Yeah.
I am on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. I am Erica Schultz 42. And on Instagram, I am Erica Schultz Writes, WRITES. I am on Blue Sky. I am Erica Schultz 42 on Blue Sky. And if you want to go to my site, you can go to ericaschultzwrites.com, and I have a shop where I have a bunch of comics. I've got the stuff that you can find in stores, but I also have a lot of my indie stuff that if you didn't support the Kickstarter, you might not know about it. So there's a couple of Kickstarter books that I have up there, and I also do like weaving and stuff. So I have like all these like fun things that I've done for weaving that's up there, and yeah, it's pretty much a one stop shop for all the Erica insanity you can find. Yeah.
Amazing. I love it. I love it. Oh, definitely. It's been a pleasure, absolutely. And we will include all of that information in the show notes for this episode. Thank you again so much for taking the time to meet with us. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've had such a fun time talking with you, and come back anytime.
Thank you very, very much. It was great, and thank you guys for thank you both for taking some time to chat. Yeah.
Yes, of course. It's been the best time. And that's a wrap on this episode of Vigilante Vibes, a Marvel podcast. Special thank you to Erica Schultz for stopping by. Until next time, you can follow me on Twitter at Vigilante Vibes. And you can follow us over at nerdinitiative.com as we review the latest movies, shows, and comics. Follow our podcast on all the socials at Vigilante Vibes Podcast. Join our non-toxic Facebook group of over 50,000 Marvel fans, Mediaverse Comics Unwrapped. Follow our public Facebook page, Vigilante Vibes Podcast. We have new episodes premiering every week. If you like what you've heard, please hit that subscribe button. And if you really love us, drop a 5-star review wherever you are listening to this episode. We would so appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in, and goodbye for now.